Yeah, thank you very much, George, for that introduction and for reaching out to me to present for Alias. Glad to be here, and thank you all for taking your time to come and watch me chat. So I'll be presenting on the 2023 paper that our group did, Extended Difficulties Following the Use of Psychedelic Drugs. Um, so I made this graph a while ago, 2 years ago now. And as you can see, academic interest in psychedelics is up and running, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. However, the harms and the negative sides of psychedelics are not really researched much. And there are claims of uncritical positive regard and hype surrounding these psychedelics and their potential, which there is. However, criticisms have also included that study designs are reporting styles are reporting biasly towards positive over negative outcomes. And this is going to be a problem because now more than ever, loads of people are using psychedelics. And it's rare, but someone is going to get hurt um, because they're not well informed on these negative effects. So in 2022, Jules Evans set up the Challenging Psychedelic Experience project to disseminate research on harms and how to integrate these experiences to provide a more informed picture of what is actually going on. So my talk is going to cover a brief overview of the current research on extended difficulties. Study design and methods I'll briefly speak about, and then I'll go into the results. It's a mixed method study, so I'll go separately into both the quantitative and qualitative aspects. Then I'll present a case study, which made headlines in the news. Some of you might be aware of it. Then talk about coping mechanisms and conclusion. So, what is a challenging psychedelic experience? So, challenging psychedelic experience is a term used to describe the adverse effects of a psychedelic substance, primarily characterized by unwanted, negative, or distressing experiences and or feelings that occur during or following the acute psychedelic episode. And this is further, it can be broken down into an acute challenging experience, or colloquially called a bad trip. So for example, during the come up of this trip, I experienced philosophical thoughts about what it would be like to die. My emotional reaction was extremely strong. I felt dark and cold as if I was dying. My thoughts evolved into things like life is very hard. For me, this was a strange experience because I consider myself an optimistic person, happy with who and where I am. It felt like a dark energy that was hidden inside. During this first phase of the trip, I had a really hard time surrendering, especially because I was with friends. This is an example of one of the participants who provided a trip report. We didn't include it because we're using extended difficulties, but this is what happened during that psychedelic experience or trip. And research on this is pretty well covered. We've got a growing body of acute experience phenomenology, from fear, confusing, troubling visions, death, not literally, meant to be thoughts of death, paranoia, things of insanity, and grief. And the group at Johns Hopkins, Barrett et al., they did a study and they've developed the Challenging Experience Questionnaire, which is being used by quite a few different groups around the world now. So the acute experience is well documented, and we want to look more into now the extended challenging experience, which happens after the pharmacological effects of the drugs have worn off. So what is this? So one participant reported the deepest, most profound depression of my life. I could not find pleasure in literally anything, and I could not feel a connection with another human being, no matter their relation, no matter the quality of our interaction. It was the deepest loneliness. It was worse than that, though. It was almost a post-apocalyptic vibe that had clouding every single moment, every single thought. I never imagined a place that bad. So what do we know so far about extended difficulties? So functional impairments, in a study conducted by Simmons and et al., around 613 people, all reporting negative experience. So around 9% of this group experience functional impairments. So functional impairment is essentially the ability to get on with daily functioning, but this is being impaired. This could be things like work, going to school, thinking, basic things to do with just getting on with life. And this was impaired in 9% of the group. There were also psychological challenges. So in the global ayahuasca survey, 12% of ayahuasca users required psychological assistance after the experience. And 24% of psilocybin users reported anxiety, paranoia, or fear lasting over a week. 10% had symptoms persisting beyond a year, and 7.6% sought professional help. There's also self-harm risks. So between 6.7% and 11% of participants or individuals have reported thoughts or attempts to harm themselves or others following a distressing experience. And finally, we all know psychedelics cause visual hallucinations. And in 40 to 60% of patients, this sometimes, of individuals, sorry, not patients, this persists even after the effects are worn out. And sometimes if this condition persists for longer, and it's distressing to the individual, it can be diagnosed as hallucinogen persisting perceptual disorder. And it is sort of semi-permanent to permanent. It varies across individuals. And the most common type of HPPD is visual snow. So individuals report this disturbance of snow-like phenomena in their visual field. And around less than 5% of individuals who've tried psychedelics tend to report HPPD. And this is also fairly under-researched. And as far as I'm aware, there's no cure for it. It tends to wean off with time. It could take from anywhere from a few weeks to years. So there's no cure for HPPD. So Global Drug Survey findings by Copra et al. Reported 22.5% of LSD and psilocybin users reported negative outcomes. So with mental confusion being the most common. This would also fall under functional impairments. 6% experienced difficulties lasting over a month, and 1% sought medical help. This paper by Rebecca Bremler from the Imperial Group, she did a study looking at negative effects as well, and around 80% of participants reported similarities to unpleasant psychedelic experiences. And this included flashbacks, so this feeling of tripping again, or physical symptoms like nausea. We also have disconnection and derealization. That was from the same study. Just under half experienced disconnection and isolation following the trip after the effects worn out. And others reported derealization, such as out-of-body feelings, losing connection with reality. And it's a sort of sensation you feel like you're passing by and the world you inhabit is not real. And some predictors of these challenging experiences, loads of psychological factors, as I'm sure you guys are aware of. So negative mindset or lack of preparation, or being psychologically vulnerable, essentially being young or inexperienced, or having a psychiatric history of things like anxiety. Even a major prior life event like, say, changing of a new job, or you just got married, or death of a family member can trigger a challenging experience. Environmental factors, so a disagreeable physical or social environment tended to predict challenging experiences, and adverse contextual conditions. So a higher dose also tended to correlate more towards challenging experience. And interestingly, use of mood stabilizers like lithium also predicted having an adverse experience. And Busso et al., again, the global ayahuasca survey, this is more specific towards ayahuasca, said that being female, unmarried, or having pre-existing anxiety or taking psychedelics in a non-religious setting could trigger an adverse experience. So we wanted to, with our research, build on this research and create a taxonomy of challenging experiences. And in particular, we were interested in how participants who experience these things tend to report it. So this is our study, extended difficulties, and main rationale and aims was to look at the effects after 24 hours, after all pharmacological effects, after the effects are worn off. And we wanted to look at the types of experiences people are having, what kind of challenges, the phenomenology, the way in which they are experiencing or describing this perceived causality with a bunch of, we did some regression analysis with a bunch of etiological factors. And we also looked at risk factors. And the quantitative questions that we wanted to answer were what types of difficulties are reported following a psychedelic experience, and what is the relative prevalence of this? Are there any contextual social settings and psychedelic substances that precede these difficulties? And to what extent do participants attribute a relationship between enduring difficulties and A, past traumatic experience, or B, prior or subsequent diagnosis of a mental illness? Is there a link between these factors? And we looked at some descriptive data, descriptive statistics, looking at current attitudes towards psychedelics. Do people still use them after having a challenging experience, or are they refraining? And yeah, so these were the main things we wanted to look at from the quantitative side. The qualitative side, we wanted to see how these individuals experience these difficulties, which I've already mentioned. And individuals wrote in a narrative form, and from 2 to 3 minutes of writing. And then we did a thematic analysis on this. So this was a mixed methods study, convergent mixed methods study. We didn't give any preference or hierarchy for quantitative and qualitative. They were meant to inform each other. So the way in which it was designed was quite nice, because they did in fact inform each other. And then participants were asked about things like the drug they took, the dosage, the setting, trip difficulty, and then things like the range of difficulties or the duration in which, how long it lasted. And finally, the qualitative analysis itself was done by a method called structured tabular thematic analysis, which hopes to look at brief texts written from 3 to 4 minutes. And that's why we were able to get a fairly large sample size of 608. Is meant to, in the future, we're hoping to look at this, use it in Reddit or things like that, where we can collect more and more data. And this was developed by a researcher in our group called Oliver Robinson. I can chat more about the technical sides of the analysis later, maybe. So we had a total of 608 responses. We had 296 male, 288 female, and 14 other participants. And 52 distinct countries, but around 32% were from the States, around 22% British, 4% Canadian, and the rest can't remember off the top of my head. And classic, we had around 84% white individuals in the study. So the quantitative results. So here were all of the different locations in which individuals took these substances. And you can see in blue is unguided and red is guided. So the most frequent setting was with a friend, partner, or group of friends, and then followed by on my own. and then in a group ceremony. And one thing you may have noticed if you looked towards the end of this table is at a clinic or medical trial. We had around 17 people reporting adverse effects in a clinic or medical trial, which is meant to be controlled for to limit this. So yes, we can get adverse effects even in a clinical trial. It's rare, but it does happen. And interestingly, individuals in a guided setting, which makes sense, exhibited significantly lower levels for the range of difficulties they encountered compared to individuals in the blue that were unguided. So these were the different substances participants took, with psilocybin and LSD being the most frequent, followed by ayahuasca, cannabis, and we can debate if some of these are psychedelics or not, but that will be a whole other talk. And in the other category, we had things like 5-MeO DMT, PCP, Bufo, 2CB, nitrous oxide. But yeah, majority was psilocybin and LSD. And duration of difficulties, so around 91 participants reported having difficulties for anywhere between 1 to 3 years. And then after that, a sixth of our samples, 103 reported being the most frequent in this sort of categorical bracketing, had experiences, difficult experiences lasting for more than 3 years, and some of them still do. So, interestingly, drug type had a significant effect on duration of difficulty. And when we did a further analysis and looked at the within group differences, we only found a difference between LSD and psilocybin, probably because they had the most individuals in them, so probably more power there. The others weren't that significant, but if you look at this, DMT and LSD are the longest enduring difficulties, and this is more on the speculative side, but maybe because DMT is meant to be considered quite an intense psychedelic experience, and LSD is between 8 to 12 hours, so there's more time persistence for a difficulty to happen in that range, basically. Now we looked at yeah, you're going to see a bunch of pie charts now. So we asked participants if they had a knowledge of drug dose. 73.8% said they did. And interestingly, the knowledge of the dose, having a knowledge of the drug dose was associated with shorter duration of difficulties compared to if you had no knowledge. And regarding mental illness, so 28.5% of our sample had a diagnosis of mental illness prior to this challenging experience. Then within that 28.5%, we asked them if the challenging experience they encountered was in any way related to the diagnosis they received, and 45.9% said yes, it was. And then since having this difficult experience, 18.8% said that they've now had a new mental health diagnosis. And out of that 18.8%, 53.6% said it was related to this challenging experience. And in terms of childhood trauma, we didn't get any significant, we just got these descriptive statistics, but 40% said that it was in fact, the challenging experience was in fact related to a major childhood trauma. And then we asked participants if they still continue to take psychedelics, and around over half said yes, they do. Interestingly, one of the major predictors of a challenging experience was the intensity of the experience. And this predicted both the duration as well as the range of difficulties encountered. And I've spoken about a range of difficulties quite a bit, and this is all of the core quantitative side of things. So we'll dive a little bit now into what this range entails. So the main categories that we found were as follows. So we had roughly 7 to 8 main categories, with emotional difficulties being the most prevalent, followed by self-perception, cognitive, social, ontological, which my colleague Irene will be presenting on ontological difficulties at the next one of the Alias talks soon. She couldn't make it today, sadly. And so this is the frequency of prevalence for the different experiences, and one participant could experience multiple of these at the same time or during the same trip. And then, so just to let you know, these are the main categories, and within these categories, we actually had 62 sub-themes, so 62 different types of difficulties participants could potentially encounter. But I'm going to show you in the next slide just the main ones from this. So here they are. So this was some of the information we got from the thematic analysis. So the main themes, which I just showed you, are in the center as a pie chart. You'll notice, some of you will notice that the percentage is different. So this does not represent our sample. This is just a pie chart. So it's adjusted for the prevalence in relation to each other. So it makes 100. So you don't have to worry too much about the percent here. I won't read through all of this information. It's a lot to take in, but I'll give you guys some examples. So, for example, if you look at anxiety or fear, which was the most frequently reported theme, which falls under this category of emotional difficulties. So one person said, for about 18 months, I woke with the sun every morning full of a feeling of absolute terror. Sometimes my anxiety would be so high in the morning that I would physically shake from the energy. Then, relation to cognitive issues, for example, difficulty thinking or confusion. So I couldn't think or speak linearly for at least a few days, or at least it felt that way. Everything felt confusing, and I didn't know if or when it was going to end. I didn't understand what was happening to me and did not have any language for it. We'll do one more. So visual hallucinations. So multiple times throughout the day, if I focus on something, my vision looks like it's stretching and moving around. It gets worse the more I try to look for it. So these are just some of the different experiences across the range of categories we established. We had 62 overall, but there's probably, don't know how much there is here, but these were the main ones that people said they experienced. So the top six in this case were first anxiety being the most frequent, then existential confusion, depersonalization, derealization, and then social disconnection and distortions. So now, yeah, this was basically everything from our study, all of the information we got. I'm going to give you a quick case study of one of these difficulties. So we'll take a look at this condition called derealization. So what is derealization? It's a feeling of when you feel like you feel out of your body, you feel that you are passing by in this reality and that the world is not real. So one person reported, almost exactly 2 months after the trip, something happened. I went to the bathroom. All of a sudden, the bathroom was not real. It just looked wrong. I had to just get out of there. But when I left the restaurant, the street outside was not real either. The whole world was simply not real, and I felt like I had to vomit. So this is a case of derealization that one of the participants in our study reported. And this brings me to the curious case of Joseph Emerson. Some of you may have read about this. It made international news. So, a bit of a story now. So, this guy here, Joseph Emerson, is a licensed pilot. He's a husband and father of two. Neighbors say he's friendly, just an upbeat guy, pretty sound. Nothing can go wrong. And he'd had no incidents involving safety in his last 20 years as a pilot. And in his local flying club, he was actually the safety officer. So one day, he goes to, I think he went to Alaska. He tried magic mushrooms, flew to Alaska for the first time, by the way, with some friends. And what he noticed is that he didn't sleep for 40 hours following the trip. And then he's flying back to San Francisco. And during the flight, so now he's in the flight, in the cockpit, and he says something like, "I'm not okay." Then he grabbed the emergency shut off handles, which basically would have turned off the plane's engines and potentially crashed the plane. So the pilots in the plane had to wrestle him out of the cockpit, and they told the air steward that he basically said, "You better cuff me now, or it's going to be bad," quote unquote. And then later, a stewardess told the police that he said something like, I messed everything up." So the plane made an emergency landing in Portland, and Emerson was arrested, and he was charged with 83 accounts of attempted murder. And if convicted, he could have faced at least 10 years in jail. Emerson then told the investigators later, quote, "It seemed like the pilots weren't paying attention to what was going on. I pulled both emergency shut-off handles because I thought I was dreaming and I just want to wake up." And so what's going on? What's happening here? So in Emerson's head, he had to pull off these emergency handles to wake up. And it seems like a case of derealization. So when this case came out, there were mixed sort of reports from industry experts. A few came forward to say that this probably wasn't the drug, it was probably Emerson's own issues. Another expert said most people feel feelings of unity and extreme and bliss and the mystical experience, and things like extreme reactions like paranoia or violence are not part of the clinical trials. They are sometimes. And yeah, so it's weird. Not everyone had this kind of defensive attitude. Actually, Matthew Johnson came out and said, reported that this does seem like it is a case of derealization. Yeah. So what's a bit troubling about this is that these inaccurate statements, which we can't really blame the researchers or the people in this field or the general public, is because they don't have information that psychedelics could also potentially cause derealization. But then these inaccurate statements make it more likely that an innocent man will probably go to jail for attempted murder because he probably won't be able to make the sort of temporary drug-induced insanity plea which has been done in the past. So, in short, Emerson had an episode of derealization, and he had no idea that he could be in an altered state 48 hours after taking psychedelics. And he didn't know that he could fly a plane. And yeah, so this is interesting. And strangely, when this came out, our group had just published the paper, and this report came out I think a month later. And in January, one of Emerson's lawyers, he gets in touch with Jules, who's the project lead of our group. And so he's used this evidence, some of it, to help convince a grand jury to drop the murder charge of 84 counts of attempted murder. He's still being charged of different things, but at least that big thing is dropped now. And so he's not in prison. He's not going to be spending time in prison for the rest of his life, which is a good thing. And it's a good thing that he didn't crash the plane to begin with. And another paper of ours looked at something different. We looked at coping techniques, how to deal with these experiences. And most people reported meditation helped. Some people did yoga, Tai Chi, exercise. Time in nature was useful, cold baths. Some even said just accepting and trusting the process made things back to normal. So self-education is useful. I think from the top of my head, there's a Reddit subgroup of challenging experiences where people disclose these experiences, which is nice to know that you're not alone in this if you're going through something. Social support was also helpful for family members, therapists, and spiritual guides. However, it wasn't helpful if they were too quick to dismiss, pathologize, or spiritualize their problems. Um, yeah, so some thought the difficulties were ultimately part of a long journey to healing. Not everyone felt that way. And finally, we asked participants this question if this is what they answered to. I believe that the insights and healings gained from psychedelics when taken in a supportive setting are worth the risks involved. So around 80% either agreed or strongly agreed to this statement. I'll briefly speak about the implications of our research. So in short, extended difficulties can sometimes happen, both in guided and unguided settings. This also will help inform consent. Clinics and retreat centers should clearly communicate, as well as the positive results that we always see, also the potential harms and their relative risks, so participants are informed on this matter. And then about the duration of the integration process. For some people, psychedelic is, you're having this life-changing experience, and then you're going back to reality. It just, it can take a while to integrate that process. So just informing newcomers to this experience about both the harms and the duration of integration is important. Coping strategies. So I briefly mentioned patients and participants, and maybe even practitioners should be informed about practices that can aid in managing these difficulties. And finally, structured training. So our findings aim to support structured guidance and training for therapists, clinics, and retreats on addressing these adverse experiences and risk factors, and hopefully make psychedelics a little bit more safer. So this is the rest of our team contributed to this paper, and that is everything from me. Thank you very much.